Hello, welcome to the Pitcher Nail Down. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Scott Mailwig at Sports 25 to Life. Talking about all the pitching options for tonight's slate. Huge slate for a Monday, 15 games. It's more like a Tuesday or Friday slate, seems like, with every team playing. So obviously a lot of options and a lot of very good options, but still no one that stands out as like a must play to me by any means. So we'll go ahead and start here at the top with we'll start DraftKings. Masahiro Tanaka is your most expensive pitcher at $10,600 on DraftKings. On FanDuel, he's quite a bit cheaper. He's $9,400, I believe. $9,600 on FanDuel. And, he's only pitched 36 in the third innings this year, but 28.3% strikeout rate, just a 5.1% walk rate, 0.74 home runs per nine. I mean, he's got a lot of good things going for him tonight, and I think that he's probably one of my favorite tournament options. I don't know if I could pull the trigger on him in cash games. How about you?
I feel pretty good about him in cash games. He's been really good. Miami's offense isn't anything special, especially against righties.
Yeah.
He's a pretty big favorite. I think he's like minus 155 last I saw. So I feel okay about him. Like, I don't feel great. Like, if he had like 10 starts already, great. But I think he's a pretty safe option in terms of cash games. At least getting the win here, most likely. I mean, Miami's throwing, Tom Kohler against him today. So,
yeah.
I mean, not a guy that is going to shut down that Yankees offense by any means. So I think he's a pretty solid option. He's not my favorite option on this slate, really. There's a lot of guys that, it's a whole bunch of guys that really feel a little bit more like GPP plays than cash game plays is really what it is. And he honestly might be the safest one out of all of them. The guy I'm leaning with in cash games is Liriano today, I think. Minus 170 against the White Sox. The White Sox just haven't been very good. Liriano's been really good. He feels like probably my safest cash game play today, although I never really feel all that safe with Liriano because there's always like that one out of every 4 games where he just looks like the worst pitcher on the planet.
Yep.
So there's always that concern there, but he's been really impressive this year. I think he's gone 6 innings and all but 1 start. Had some big strikeout games. I think he had 11 and 12 back-to-back against San Diego and the Mets about a week ago. So I feel pretty good about him. I think that's the way I'm going in cash games if I can. And then the rest of these guys I'm probably going to mix and match and play a lot of GPPs today because there's a lot of high upside pitchers on the slate today, but no one that feels really like just absolutely locked in for me.
Yeah, and matchups don't get any better than they do for Liriano tonight. You're looking at the White Sox numbers against lefties, 244 team WOBA, by far the worst, not even close, .078 ISO, and his biggest weakness, Liriano's that is walking batters, and at a 8.7% rate, which is actually lower than it has been over the past couple of years.
Yeah.
But White Sox, the worst in the league at drawing walks against lefties at 5.5%. So that right there, tells you that you don't expect many of these guys to put up a fight at all. You got Jose Abreu to worry about, and you have no one else. Adam Eaton's a decent hitter, but he's a lefty. Adam LaRoche, lefty also. So, he shouldn't see a whole lot of resistance tonight, that's for sure.
Yeah, I feel pretty good about him. There's a couple other interesting guys, like Dallas Keuchel is a really interesting option today. He's by far the biggest favorite on the board, I believe. Minus 200 right now against Colorado. Colorado, not usually a team people go out of their way to target, but with the way Keuchel's been pitching, and Colorado's been pretty up and down, especially when they're not at home. They've been struggling at times, so he's an interesting option. He's that weird, it's tough to decide whether he's a GPP play or a cash game play, though, because, that money line makes it feel like he's a cash game play at minus 200 there, but, he almost feels more like a GPP play to me for some reason.
Yeah, he kind of does because, you look at his numbers, he's got less than 20% strikeout rate, 19.8. But, obviously what you love about him is his ground ball rate, 64.2, 0.38 home runs per nine. So, he's the ultimate ground ball pitcher. He's tops in the league, I believe, still right now. But this is also a Rockies team that strikes out more against left-handed pitching than any other team. So, something's got to give there where he's not a big strikeout guy, but this is a team that strikes out a ton against lefties. But then, if you really look at it, last time he had a similar matchup was when he faced the White Sox, who are also terrible against lefties. Went complete game, 4 hits, no walks, 11 Ks. 24 fantasy points on FanDuel. So, I think this is a very similar matchup to that one, where it's pretty much, Troy Tulowitzki is your Jose Abreu in that lineup. And, I mean, I just don't think they're going to put up much of a fight. So I think I think I'll be playing him in both. I think he's a fine option, cash or GPP.
Yeah, I like him too. Gio Gonzalez is the guy I actually have projected the highest today that I don't really know if I feel that great about. I think he's a really good GPP option. He's basically playing that same matchup that Chris Sale had yesterday, a strikeout lefty against Tampa Bay who doesn't strike out a ton.
Their strikeout rate's higher now against lefties than it was yesterday.
Yeah, that's true. It's higher than it was yesterday. That's a good point. We saw Sale have a pretty nice game there, kind of lost it a little bit at the end when he had been on fire prior to that. And I think it was the eighth inning that he struggled a little bit to get out of. But Gio Gonzalez can have a similar performance. He's obviously not the strikeout guy that Sale is, but I think he can rack up 8 or so strikeouts in this game, pitch deep into it. Minus 105. So, I mean, not a big favorite here, although I'm a little surprised he's not a bigger favorite because Tampa Bay just does not hit the ball against anyone lately.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we saw the guy that finally got to him. It was, who was it? Asdrubal Cabrera is the one that's now. I mean, he's been one of the worst hitters in the major leagues all season. So, I mean, that was fluky, if you ask me. Not something that you really worry about. Obviously, it's just one mistake, but I mean, he does have some really big upside. 56% ground ball rate. It's at their raised strikeout percentage up to 22.9 now. So, I think that Gio Gonzalez is one of those guys that a lot of people don't they kind of overlook him, I guess I should say. And because he hasn't been great against righties this year, 349 WOBA allowed. But I think a lot of that is just due to when he's good, and when he's bad, he's really bad. But I think he's been pretty consistent for the most part over his past few starts, and I'm with you. I think he's got a nice upside in this matchup for sure.
Yeah, and he's priced a little bit cheaper than the rest of these options we've been talking about too. Only 8,500 on DraftKings compared to all the other guys we've mentioned so far, 96 plus. Yeah, the first two are over 10K. So there's a nice little discount there. He makes probably for my my favorite GPP option. I don't know about the best one, but he's my favorite one because of ownership today. Another similar guy, Jake Arrieta, 9,400 on DraftKings, minus 35 favorite against Cleveland. I prefer lefties against Cleveland if I'm going to attack it aggressively, but I don't mind him as a GPP play today either. There's quite a bit of rain in both this Arrieta and Liriano rain, and frankly, there's quite a bit of rain on the slate today. Probably half the games are 40+% chance of rain. So that's something we're going to have to keep an eye on all day with all of these pitchers. Liriano's probably more of a GPP play because of the rain, and Tanaka is probably going to be more of my cash game play if the rain stays the way it is, just because I don't know if they're going to run Liriano back out there with his injury history if there's a 45-minute-hour delay or whatever. So that makes it a little tricky there. Arrieta, I feel a little bit better about him coming back after a delay, and it looks like there's a little bit smaller chance of rain in that game. But Cleveland's offense hasn't been great. They've been better, especially against righties lately, with Santana hitting better, and Kipnis has been red hot, obviously. Brantley back in the lineup for the last couple weeks has looked pretty good. So they're getting a little better. I think he's more of a GPP play than anything, despite being a decent favorite. I just would rather go with one of these bigger favorites, not facing a Cleveland lineup that's been kind of hot lately.
Yeah, and I mean, when you figure on the other side, Trevor Bauer was bad in his last game, but was really good in the 3 to 4 starts before that. So, there's no guarantee he's going to get a lot of run support either. With the Cubs offense that strikes out a ton against a strikeout pitcher, we might see a pitcher's duel here. So I think for those reasons, he's more of a GPP play for me as well. Just because the matchup's okay, but you don't love it, and you don't want to pay top dollar for a guy in an okay matchup. So that's my thinking on that. And then next guy up, Tyson Ross. He's $9,000 on FanDuel. DraftKings, he's $8,700, and this is a guy that's really frustrating to roster. He's got a big-time strikeout rate, 24.9%. Great ground ball rate, 62.3. Keeps the ball in the park at .36 home runs per 9, but 11.1% walk rate, something you always are concerned with. And then, you look at what Oakland does against righties, and as always, they're one of the better teams in the league. They're 9th in team WOBA. They don't strike out hardly at all, 17.5%. A walk rate of 7.7 is pretty high as well, so one of their strengths is walking. Another one is putting the ball in play. And, something's got to give there because that's a good offense against a pitcher that keeps the ball on the ground. So, GPP only for me, not a guy I would even think about in cash.
Yeah, I feel the same way about him. That's about where I'm at. just not my favorite option.
No, he's a guy that I just can never find myself trusting him a whole lot because he's just so wild at times, and he doesn't pitch deep into games sometimes because he just throws so many pitches because his command is off. I mean, you look at over his last 7 starts, he's gone more than 6 innings once.
Yeah.
Over his last 10, he's done it twice. So I mean, he's just for $9,000 for that type of price. I'm not paying that type of price for a guy that's only going to give me 6 innings tonight in a subpar matchup.
Exactly. That's the big problem. You can just bank on the innings with some of these other guys, and it just makes it so much easier because you don't need a massive strikeout day when a guy goes 8 innings instead of 6 innings, and that's the big thing for me. I generally value innings pitched over just about everything if I'm looking for like a stud cash game pitcher, just because it's usually the most predictable thing. Yeah. Assuming nothing crazy happens, and especially with the higher guys, like, I mean, you look at a guy like who's not on the slate, but David Price is a guy you can pretty much count on for 7+ every single time out. Yep. And it just helps you a ton in cash games because you almost know you're getting 7, and if he's having a really nice day, he's probably going to give you 8 and maybe even 9 sometimes. So it just gives you a really nice floor to look at, and that's the way I approach it in cash games. In GPP, obviously, you can look more for strikeouts and hope the guy has a nice game and gets a little bit deeper. But when you're looking at guys that throw a ton of pitches like that, it caps their upside, even though it doesn't really seem like it.
Yeah, and I mean, another thing about that is, if your guy's pitching 7-8 innings, chances are the other starter's coming out. You get your offense behind you, chance to go after the bullpen, get you more of a chance of getting the win. Because obviously, if you're pitching 8 innings, you're pitching well. So
yeah, definitely. 2 other guys that have big favorite numbers that look like decent cash game plays if we can avoid some rain here. Anibal Sanchez and Chen for Baltimore. Chen's thrown against Philadelphia, who everybody's been targeting. He's a -195. A little bit less chance of rain there for 7,700. I really like him against the Philly lineup today. I think he's probably going to be my starting pitcher too on DraftKings and cash games. He hasn't been great, but he's been pretty consistent all year. I don't think he's been below 10 DraftKings points, which I know that's not a great number, but he's been above 10 in like 8 straight starts. He's had a couple 25+ games, so there's a little bit of upside there. He's not a huge strikeout guy, but we saw him put up 9 against big surprise Houston the other day. So there's a little bit of upside when he's in the right matchup. I think Philly's the right matchup for him too is a big thing.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, I mean, as far as his cash games, you said he doesn't have a particularly high floor, but his floor is still way better than everyone else. I mean, he hasn't had a start where he's just gotten crushed, where a lot of these guys have those games where they get you negative points, but he doesn't have that because he's been an effective pitcher. So
yeah,
that's a good way to go with cash games there. And then Anibal Sanchez, I mean, he's been so up and down this season. I mean, he's had so many really good performances and then so many just horrible ones. I mean, 1.43 home runs per 9. Fortunately, it's in Detroit and not in Cincinnati. You got to like that. But, I mean, he went 7 2/3 with 7 Ks against Chicago, and then 1 K the game before that against Oakland, 9 against the Angels, 2 against Milwaukee. I mean, he's very up and down, but, I mean, I think he's a fine option tonight as well because, I mean, that Reds offense is just so depleted. I mean, Brandon Phillips back now, but you're still missing some bats that you don't have to navigate anymore. So definitely.
Yeah, at that same price range, I prefer Chen, both just because he's a little bit safer, and the Phillies offense just doesn't scare me at all against him. A little bit less of a rain concern too. Sanchez, I think that's probably the most likely rain out of the day, isn't it? At Detroit game, Cincinnati to Detroit, 90% chance of rain. I think that's far and away the biggest one. So that's a little concerning there. I'm probably going to go Chen quite a bit, pair him with Tanaka in cash games is what I'm thinking. As far as GPPs go, I mean, you can mix and match almost all of these guys we've mentioned so far. And if I'm looking down the list a little bit further, there's some cheap guys that are fairly interesting, but no one that really jumps out at you today. I think Rick Porcello is probably the guy that I'm going to look at most for cheap guys. Only 6,600 on DraftKings, facing an Atlanta team that they don't score a ton of runs, but they also don't strike out very much. But Porcello's not really a big strikeout guy anyway. Speaking of guys that I like to play because they pitch a decent amount of innings almost every time out, he's one of those guys for me. I think he had his first game in a while under 6 innings pitched against Baltimore last time out. I think he went 8 against Minnesota the game before that. their bullpen's been pretty good, and so it's been relieving him a little bit. But he's a guy that pitches 7 or more innings pretty often when he's actually got it going. The problem is he doesn't have it going almost every game. It's like every other game lately where he's been like struggling to get people out against bad teams, and then he'll face a good team and be like pretty quality. I remember that game against Toronto. I think it was the beginning of May or whatever, where he had struggled. I think 2 games before that or whatever. Then he went out there and threw like 7 innings and struck out 7 guys and only gave up 1 run against Toronto. So he's an interesting one for me tonight. I think he's probably more of a cash game play just because I don't really believe in his upside very much.
Yeah.
And at 6,600 on DraftKings, you can definitely do worse.
Yeah, and I mean, his main struggle is with lefties, which is what kind of concerns me with him because, you got Freddie Freeman is obviously your lefty you're worried about there, but Jace Peterson hitting the ball well, Nick Markakis, no big bats, but I mean, a couple of bats that could definitely get to him with that 343 WOBA allowed to lefties. But I'm with you there. I mean, he doesn't have a whole lot of downside. He's a guy that you kind of know what you're going to get out of him. He usually doesn't get hit hard, even when he does. So, next guy, and this one is another guy with rain concern, but obviously we're going to cover all the options because there's a lot of concerns everywhere. John Lackey against Minnesota. He's $8,200 on FanDuel. On DraftKings, he's even cheaper. He's $7,700. And it's a Minnesota team that, as we know, crushes left-handed pitching. They're very good at home. But when you get this team on the road and they're against right-handed pitching, they're not very good. I mean, 28th in the league, 292 team WOBA, 21.1% strikeout rate. Obviously, Lackey not a big strikeout pitcher, but he's taken advantage of opportunities when and missing bats in situations like this. He had 9 strikeouts against the Dodgers. He had 10 against the Cubs. But then he's had other ones with 1 and 2 and 2. So not a guy that I would really consider in GPPs because I don't think he has a lot of upside at all. But assuming the weather's fine, I think he's a fine SP2 option for your cash games.
Yeah, I like him quite a bit for cash games. I think that's a pretty solid play there. In that same price range, Noah Syndergaard for the Mets, I think, makes a decent GPP play today. He's been really quiet over his last 2 games, hasn't had a lot of batted ball luck. I think he's given up 10 hits in back-to-back games. But Toronto's a team that's much better against righties. And so I think he makes a decent GPP play today. They're actually a small favorite, I want to say. I think he's like minus 110. He's going to be super low owned. And we know he throws really hard, has the strikeout upside, has been going pretty deep into games for the most part. I think he's gone 6+ innings in 4 of his last 5 starts. He struggled against San Diego that game. He gave up like 7 runs and came out pretty early. But I mean, even against San Francisco last time out, he gave up 10 hits, but still managed to go 6 innings, only give up 4 earned runs. So I think there's some decent upside there. He's not in play whatsoever for me in cash games, but as a guy that's probably going to be sub 5% owned against a team that hits righties a lot better than lefties, I think he's an interesting GPP play today.
Yeah, I mean, Mark Burley on the other side, the ultimate contact pitcher. I mean, he's had 2 complete games in his last 3, but ended up with 12 and 15 FanDuel points, including the win on those. So, I mean, when he's good, he's good. When he's bad, he's bad. But, I mean, he's a guy that will not strike out any batters. So, I mean, he's just initiating the contact. I think he puts the balls in play, put the ball in the gap, then I think that he could be in for a long night and get some run support for Syndergaard there. Another guy who's an interesting option, not a guy I'm a huge fan of. He was really cheap on DraftKings for a little while. Edison Volquez, he's $7,100 on DraftKings. He's, I believe, $7,600 on FanDuel.
Yeah.
And, he's $8,500 on FanDuel. So certainly not a guy I'm considering there at all. But, you look at this Brewers team. This is a team that people have been, reluctantly or not, they've been picking on a lot. I mean, 22% strikeout rate, 26th in the league against right-handed pitching. And, Volquez is a guy who, he's very inconsistent, but if you look at his numbers, I mean, he's right about league average and everything. Right around a 20% strikeout rate. His walk rate's higher than you'd like, almost 9%. But he doesn't give up home runs, .49. And that's how the Brewers beat you. The Brewers aren't going to beat you playing small ball. So if Volquez can keep the ball in the park here, then I think he could be an interesting GPP guy. But for me, it's like, if I have 20 lineups, we're going single bullet with Edison Volquez. Like minimal exposure, but I think he's worth a look.
Yeah, he's definitely worth a look. I prefer him in cash games more than GPPs, honestly. I mean, Milwaukee just hasn't been very good.
Yeah.
And like you said, Volquez doesn't have big strikeout upside. He's not a guy pitching deep into games. He's just going to be a guy that you're hoping can give you 6 one-run innings against a team like Milwaukee. And he can definitely do that. It's just not something I'm going to try and count on very often.
Yeah, absolutely. Next guy's a really interesting option, and I want to get your take on this because I don't play anyone against the Dodgers, and I'm not a big fan of this guy, but he has been pitching well, and that's Giovanni Gallardo. You look at his numbers on the season; he's been actually pretty good against left-handed batters, which is obviously the strength of this Dodgers team. 296 WOBA allowed. Got off to a really weak start and was getting crushed by lefties earlier this season, but obviously this is a top option against right-handed batters or right-handed pitchers. And Gallardo went 7 innings at Oakland with 10 Ks last time out.
Yeah.
6 innings each of his 3 before that. So he's not a guy that's ever going to blow you away. But I mean, he's shown his upside at 7,800. You're not going to find many pitchers more low owned than a right-handed pitcher against the Dodgers.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind that as a GPP play as a really low owned guy either. I mean, it's really hard to love him. I mean, even in that game against Oakland, he struck out 10 guys in 7 innings and still gave up, I think, 7 base runners and only scored 28 DraftKings points, which is fine for his price, but it's just not that massive upside that you're going to get from someone that's a little bit higher priced than that. But he's been pretty consistent lately, looked pretty good. It was nice to see the 10 strikeouts because we hadn't really seen that type of strikeouts from him in a while, basically for almost 2 seasons now. I think that was his first double-digit strikeout game in 38 starts or something like that. And so I'm not going to go out and count on the strikeouts, but I think he can have a decent game here. A lot better than most of these other guys in his price range is the thing. Just not a lot of cheap options you can really love today, especially once you start getting really low. I mean, outside of Porcello and maybe, I guess you want to count Volquez as a cheap option, those are about the only 2 guys below him that I really feel good about at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Gallardo's a guy that we've seen his upside before in the past. I mean, obviously at the tail end of his career, but still ground ball rate nearly 55%, so that's always encouraging. But like you mentioned, these cheap options, so we'll run through these guys real quick, see if anybody kind of sticks out. Not many of these guys I feel good about. I'm not playing Mark Burley. He just doesn't have upside. And maybe as a secondary cash option if you have to, just because that's such a bad Mets offense. But, I mean, at the same time, he's just not a guy that you really love. I mean, on DraftKings, I'd say he's in play because we've seen when he does pitch deep, he can get that complete game, and obviously you get a bonus for a complete game, shutouts, things like that. But, I mean, even the game at Washington when he had a complete game shutout, he scored 29 DraftKings points.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just such minimal upside. He's a cash game play at best for me. Not a guy that I'll probably be playing at all tonight.
No, I don't think I will either. Just trying to look through some of these really cheap guys. There's not really anyone that I like very much. Probably the guy I like most is Erasmo Ramirez for Tampa Bay against Washington, just because Washington's been pretty ice cold lately, even with Harper in the lineup.
Yeah, especially if he doesn't come back tonight.
Yeah, right. That's what I mean. If Harper's out of the lineup, I honestly feel pretty good about him as far as being that one guy you can kind of punt pitcher with. And I usually like having one guy like that to mix into GPPs. If Harper's out, I think he's definitely going to be that guy. There's no one else that really interests me down there. I mean, the only other guy that's really even in consideration is Frias for the Dodgers, and he just has not been good lately. And with the way Gallardo's been pitching, it doesn't seem like it's going to be an easy win. And that's kind of what's been saving him in some of his more average games. I mean, he hasn't even had what I would call a really good game more than once this season. I think St. Louis, he pitched 7 shutout innings against them one time, but only struck out 3 guys. So, there's not a lot of upside there. I think Erasmo Ramirez has some more upside. I mean, we've seen him go 7 innings with 7 strikeouts twice on the year, I believe. One of those was against Baltimore. I'm trying to remember who the other one was against, but he had an okay game against Seattle, even though he only went 5 1/3 innings against them. Struck out 5. So I think he's probably the guy I'm going to use if I'm going to punt one of my pitcher spots on DraftKings. I don't feel good about using anyone like that on FanDuel in any format, really, though, because the upside's just so small. The only thing you basically need a win, and there's no big favorites, which is the way I try to look for really cheap FanDuel pitchers, is try to find a guy in the 6,000s that's a huge favorite for a win, because the win's so important there. But today, everyone's basically going to pick him that's below 7,000 on FanDuel. And so I'm going to try and spend up a pitcher on FanDuel. So I'll probably use Ramirez a little bit on DraftKings as a pitcher too, but that's about it.
Yeah, and I mean, as you look at it, I mean, he's been very good against lefties, which fares well for him today because, Denard Span, Bryce Harper, if he's back, those are the guys that, I'm not going to say they'll struggle, but I mean, that's his strength. His struggles are with right-handed batters, and there's not a single right-handed batter in that lineup right now that any pitcher really worries about. So
Right.
I think that's a good call as a cheap option because people saw what he did at the beginning of the season and completely wrote him off as this guy's terrible, and you always see tweets about him, garbage and things. But I mean, you nailed it. I mean, he's been pitching well, so I think he's a viable cheap option. And I'll throw out one more guy, and this is obviously a GPP only play. Carlos Rodon, $7,200 on FanDuel, and on DraftKings he's $6,500. A lefty against the Pirates is the way I like to go in tournaments sometimes because the Pirates are just awful against left-handed pitching this year. 25.2% strikeout rate, 26th in WOBA in the league. We've seen what Cole Hamels has done to him twice. Obviously, Cole Hamels is a much better pitcher than Rodon, at least at this point. Rodon's early in his career. He's a rookie, but he's pitched well over his last few starts, though. And, he does have that upside. What he doesn't do is pitch deep into games. He's pitched either 6 or 6 1/3 in all but one start this season.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're not going to have a guy to pitch deep, but at $6,500 against a team that strikes out a quarter of the time against left-handed batters, if he gives you 6 innings to get you 8 Ks, I mean, he's going to crush that salary.
Yeah, I live in Chicago, so I see him pitch quite a bit, actually. And, I mean, his big thing is pitch count.
Yep.
I mean, he's a guy we know can strike out people. He has a lot of problems when he has a lot of walks. His 2 worst starts of the season, he had 6 walks in each of them, I believe. And that's really his only problem. If he can keep the ball in the strike zone, the guy throws really hard, has really good off-speed stuff. I mean, he's a really talented pitcher. He just can't keep the ball in the strike zone most of the time, and that's what's limiting him to 6 innings most of the time. I think I played him in both of his last 2 starts because he was really cheap on DraftKings. I think like 56 or 5,700 in both of those. And, I mean, he looks good. It's just when he struggles with walks, then the pitch count gets way up there, and then he comes out of the game early and gave up a couple runs. Where if he's in the strike zone, he can rack up strikeouts and pitch a little bit deeper into the game. So he's definitely a GPP play, especially facing Liriano today, who makes him a pretty big underdog. The only other concern with him is weather. That's another one of the big rain games today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you mentioned, that walk rate, 13.2% is just absolutely awful. So that's a huge concern with him. An interesting option here, and you're going to call me crazy for this one, but everyone always picks on Trevor May. But I think Trevor May is a decent pitcher. Not a guy I feel great about, but it's a St. Louis offense that's missing Matt Holliday. They haven't been hitting the ball particularly well over the past couple weeks anyway. And Trevor May is starting to get his numbers up there. I mean, pitched 62 2/3 innings, .57 home runs per 9. Ground ball rate below average at 40.5. But, I mean, he's got a 4.6% walk rate, which is great. 20.9% strikeout rate, slightly above league average. And, it's a pretty neutral ballpark there in St. Louis. And this is a guy who, he went 7 innings, 9 Ks against Boston, in Boston 2 starts ago. 6 innings, 5 Ks against Kansas City last time out. That's a tough team. I mean, 9 Ks and 7 innings against the White Sox. I think that he's my Erasmo Ramirez for you on the other side. So you're going to Erasmo, and I actually like Trevor May. And I've played him in a couple of GPPs recently, and I mean, this guy's under 1% owned like every single time. And I'm sure he will be against the Cardinals, but I mean, this isn't a complete Cardinals offense, and they're not scoring a ton of runs right now either.
Yeah, definitely. And we talk about this all the time. The Cardinals are a team that generally just like grinds out 4 or 5 runs over most games where, I mean, you can probably get Trevor May through 5 or 6 innings only giving up 2 runs if he's on today pretty easily, despite the fact that St. Louis is a pretty solid offense.
Yeah.
But I don't mind that play at all. Like you said, the fact that he's so low owned and has been looking pretty good lately against a team no one's going to really want to like actively play him against, I like that play quite a bit.
Absolutely. So hopefully we gave you guys a good look. I'm not touching any of these other guys. I know you aren't either. We would have already mentioned them. So that's going to wrap things up. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out all of our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.